You mentioned James Clear and how he helped like guide you through the writing process. So I love to learn because he's like one of the best-selling nonfiction authors out there. So what kind of wisdom or guidance did he share with you?
Oh boy, wow, you made it all the way to the acknowledgments. That's like the extra credit. Yeah, I tried to make the acknowledgments meaningful. I tried to really demonstrate the attitude that I write about in the book itself, that it's all a collective process of sense making. You know, I have trouble saying even the words "my book." Sounds ridiculous because that's like saying "my child," like as if one person raised this child. Every single person in those acknowledgments was pivotal to making this book come to life. And James really was one of my primary advisors. He was very generous with his time, getting on calls with me from the very early days. We have the same agent. We share a book agent. So there was some crossover there. But let's see, what did he... I think the main thing that I learned from James, there were many, but if I had to summarize... You know, actually, very early on, I wasn't even sure I wanted to go through a traditional publisher. And so I remember one of my first calls with him, I was like, oh, should I self-publish? Should I go through a publisher? You know, why did you go through a publisher? And the way he said it, I'm not sure he used exactly these words, but this is what I remember. He was kind of like, look, do you want to impress a small group of niche bloggers on the internet? Or do you want to reach the widest possible range of people? And it just hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, that is kind of confronting because I spend a lot of my time trying to impress a small group of niche bloggers. Those are my peers.
Or Twitter followers.
Or Twitter followers, yes.
Twitter peers, yeah.
Exactly. You know, I put something on Twitter, but you know, when you put something on Twitter, you always have a few people in mind that you hope see it, right?
Yeah. If like Naval or someone likes your tweet, it's like, oh, you're done for that. You're good.
Exactly. And if that's the case, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if that's the case, just self-publish. Don't go through this multi-year process of trying to find a publisher. But, you know, I spent most of my 20s doing international development work and charity work, nonprofit work, or in the Peace Corps, working for the U.S. government. So I'm kind of a bleeding heart, you know, type. And I just remembered all the people that I worked with or that I taught or that I served overseas. And I thought, who can this knowledge really make the biggest difference for? It's not the New York City, you know, blogger or whatever who already knows a lot of this stuff. Maybe that person will have a few light bulb moments, which is fine. But I really thought of like the 0 to 1 people, the people who, if not for a book like this that is published through a huge publisher, translated into all these languages, distributed through all these countries, might not in their whole life ever have exposure to advice about digital note-taking. That's really who I did it for. That's really who I had in mind. The goal, which is really what I learned from James, and he had the same attitude with Atomic Habits, was how can we boil this down to the simplest possible framing so that the widest range of people can benefit from it in their lives. That was really a gift that he gave me.
Yeah, and it's such a great point. I'm sure someone like one day is going to pick it up from an airport that never heard of you or like the book, just catches their eye, you know, starts reading it, builds their second brain, and just kind of like transforms their life.
Yeah.
And so, continuing this path, down the path of like writing a book, how long did it take you to write this book, and how long do you think it would have taken you if you didn't have a second brain?
It took a long time. It took a really long time. I think it's been 3.5 years since I first spoke to my agent, which was one of the first conversations I had before she was even my agent. And really, so 3.5 years really on the book, but the course on which the book is based, which is really how the ideas were developed, has now been going on 5.5 years. But then really, where did those ideas come from? It goes back a decade. It's really like a decade of my life that has been dedicated to this kind of stream of work. You know, I couldn't really accelerate the process because it didn't depend on me. It depended on the rather slow, step-by-step, you know, process that publishers follow, which actually, at this point, I kind of now understand. You know, think about if you self-publish a book, you just upload a file to a server, an Amazon server, and then it's instantly available around the world. But what we're doing is very different. This book is going to be in bookstores from many different companies in many different countries. It's going to be available through dozens and dozens of different sales channels, and so it just takes a long time. What I will say is having a second brain allowed me to write this book and continue to make progress on it when everything in my life and the world was changing. So within those 3.5 years, of course, there was COVID, but also during that same period, we moved from Mexico, where we were living in Mexico City, back to the US. My wife and I got pregnant and had our first kid. We bought our first house, bought our first dog, bought 2 cars, did extensive renovation throughout the house, including on our home office. And I started hiring a team, went from a team of 1 to 10, nearly 10. Continued teaching the online course, which is 1,000 people at a time taking this course. So a lot of things going on during that period that I think I'm sure if I didn't have an external place to keep track of all the details, either the book would have been completely derailed or all those other parts of my life would have been derailed. The ability to constantly offload what I'm thinking, turn my attention to something else, make progress, offload that, turn my attention back is completely due to my second brain.
Right. Yeah, it's great to hear that. It's something I'm going to be like implementing more in my life as well. And for anyone listening out there who like they're aspiring authors, would you recommend actually like building a course first, like which is what you did, so that way you kind of test these concepts and get like feedback from people, and then see what works best, and then put it into your book? Or like could they just like skip that step? What would your advice be to like those aspiring writers?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people in your audience, they read books, but they also have in the back of their mind they want to write one, right?
Yeah.
I'd encourage people. It is an incredible experience. You really got to dig deep and find out what you're capable of. My advice depends a lot on your situation. I have a blog post where I talk about kind of the 4 main pathways to publishing. I only took one of those pathways, which was traditional publishing. So it depends a lot on your goals, depends on who you're trying to reach, depends on your subject matter, depends on the time you want to spend, the resources you have. But I would say for those who are writing about nonfiction, especially self-improvement, which is my case, I cannot imagine a better way to prepare for that than teaching a course. Because the thing with nonfiction that I think a lot of people don't realize is the way that a nonfiction self-improvement book is measured is on the efficacy of the ideas. Like, do they actually work? And do they actually work for a lot of people? And you can't really know that as a writer. You write something down, let's say something that worked for you. How can you possibly know whether that is efficacious for a lot of people? You just can't. You have to do research, and what research looks like when it comes to humans is teaching, coaching, consulting, having people take your advice, try it, and then come back to you and say, this part worked, this didn't, this other part worked with some modifications. In the past, you had to do that. For example, David Allen did executive coaching, but executive coaching is one-on-one. So it took him, 20 plus years coaching one person at a time. You probably want to go a little bit faster than 20 plus years. So what a course allows you to do is to vastly accelerate that process by teaching groups, right? I teach a live cohort-based course where we have people get on Zoom calls and we actually interact. But you can also do this as a self-paced, like a video course. You just need, basically what you need is large groups of people from diverse backgrounds, diverse ages, diverse cultures, every kind of diversity, trying what you're saying, coming back to you and saying what worked. And then you just get the top 10% of what worked, stick it in a book. And that is how you know the book is effective. You're not guessing. You're not just being like, oh, this is kind of an entertaining anecdote. You're putting every single idea in this book, I'm certain works for a lot of people because I've seen it. And that's, by the way, what gives me the confidence to spend, 3+ years of my life on it.